Teams live event, and it is being recorded and will be available for viewing after this session at usbr.gov/bill. Thank you for taking the appropriate action if you do not want to be included in this recorded information session. All remarks are on the record and for attribution. Since we last spoke in September, Reclamation has continued its work on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. This information session is designed to update you on our progress and address your questions. We plan on addressing as many questions as possible during the question and answer period. Updated information about Reclamation's implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is always available at www.usbr.gov/bill or the Inflation Reduction Act at www.usbr.gov/inflation-reduction-act. You may find the links in the chat, or they are linked from Reclamation's homepage. Also, feel free to submit your questions and comments about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to usbr.bill@usbr.gov or for the Inflation Reduction Act at usbr.ir.act@usbr.gov, and we will work to address your questions. We also have a growing list of frequently asked questions, and we hope that is a helpful resource. We are committed to transparency throughout the process and appreciate your support of this historic opportunity to improve our nation's water infrastructure. I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Deputy Commissioner Grayford Payne. Gray?
Thanks, Mary. On behalf of Commissioner Tootin, the entire leadership team, and the 6,000 professionals who fulfill Reclamation's mission day in and day out, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Our top priority is putting the resources from the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law to work in communities on projects with the greatest impact. We are committed to ensuring these investments deliver meaningful results. Last month, we marked the 2-year anniversary of bipartisan infrastructure law. Today, Reclamation has selected 402 projects to receive more than $2.9 billion. To us, that's an astonishing amount of money and the number of projects in 2 years. The program and the projects funded under the Inflation Reduction Act will help increase water conservation, improve water efficiency across the western basins experiencing long-term drought, and help to prevent Colorado River system's reservoirs from falling to critically low elevations. In addition, more than 80 conservation implementation agreements have been executed under the program. So without further ado, I'm handing this over to Matt Mossieri to talk about the bill, Bipartisan Infrastructure Inflation Act, and then after that, Bob Wolf will take over for the IRA. Matt.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Payne, and thanks, Mary, and good morning to all of you. I'm again Matt Mossieri, and I work in Reclamation's Operations Group. Together with Beth Hughes-Brown in our budget office, we co-lead implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law for Reclamation. I'll start us off with a few slides, and then I'll hand over to Beth, and as Gray mentioned, then over to our IRA team, Bob Wolf and James Lang-Henry, and they'll narrate us through the IRA slides. In order to save time, we'll introduce one another as we transit from slide to slide. And with that, let's begin. This is just an overview here of what we're going to cover today, give you a sense of where the money's going, what's open and closed with respect to funding opportunities and staffing and Buy America, and then best of all, we try to cover your live comments and questions. Next slide, please. So this is our usual starting point. If you've been on these calls before, you've seen this slide before. We keep using it because it's just a really useful shortcut on the what and the how of what we're doing with BIL. We've got about 12 top line programs in BIL, but because of how the actual legislation was written, those 12 programs subdivide out into about 17 sort of slices of pie that you'll see in a couple slides from now. There's a broad assortment of programs that are funded by BIL. Most of them were pre-existing, but some of them were new, written into the BIL legislation. It's been BIL has been a constant drumbeat of notice of funding opportunities, or NOFOs, internal spend plans, award announcements, and groundbreakings. And we're integrating all of that new funding with old and new programs. Next slide, please. So on our last quarterly update that we did in September, we were at 370 BIL funded projects, and we had about 2.7 billion out the door on BIL funded projects. So as Gray mentioned, in the intervening months, we've allocated about an additional 200 million and gotten about 3 dozen additional projects funded. That 370 jumped up to 402 because we're always loading new projects into our system, usually within a few days of the announcement. You'll see on our website, and we'll do press releases, and then they'll load in, and that number updates. So it was things like on September 21st, we did an announcement on Columbia River salmon. On October 30th, we announced about 68 million to rural water projects. On November 15th, we announced about 51 million for 30 projects selected under our environmental water resources program. So that's the growth, is those announcements, and these will keep on spooling out for the next several years as we get through these different funding cycles, and they gradually sort of load into our system. And that's what gets us from 2.7 to 2.9, and that number will update on our next quarterly update. One thing to know is that some of these projects, though, like our rural water projects, they get funding from BIL in multiple years. So the 402 number actually somewhat underrepresents how many times a BIL allocation has been made for a specific project. But rest assured, we're tracking all of that in our budget system. Next slide, please. So this slide closely resembles the one that follows it. But this slide here, as you remember from that table slide where we started, we have about 12 top line programs. And because of how the legislation is written, they subdivide down into about 17 sort of slices of pie. And here you see those 17 slices of pie on this chart. That's because, things like the BIL's Water Smart language in the BIL told us to focus on things like multi-benefit projects or nature-based solutions in our grant awards. And so that's where how these break down. BIL also has, the aging infrastructure language that also subdivides it out into language on CARE Act, or language on specific dams or facilities that have experienced failures from aging. So we're showing here how many actual projects, individual projects, have been funded in those 17 program areas. So it's projects versus programs. And of course, we also track the funding amounts by program. And that's where I will hand off to Beth Hughes Brown. Take it away, Beth.
Hi there. Next slide, please. Now we're talking about how much money is going to each of these pots of authority. So you see the numbers there. I'm not going to read the numbers off to you, but one of the things I wanted to point out is that Matt already touched on this. Rural water, for example, the number of projects is very small. Then the dollars are very large. That was partly because we already had a program running when we started with BIL. It's partly because the requirement under BIL itself, section 40901, says has to be authorized by Congress by 7/1/21 and in accordance with the Reclamation Water Supply Act. The requirements for storage in section 40902, there was a time limitation on that for feasibility studies and for construction using those funds. So those two pots with large sums of money, each of them is about $1 billion, are restricted to a very small number of projects. Matt already touched on that, but you'll see those projects getting funding year after year because they're the ones that qualify, and they are the only ones that qualify. About 240 of the projects for a great big bunch of money are for Water Smart. And my colleague Dean will be talking about that in just a second in more detail. But that includes Title 16, Water Smart grants, multi-benefit, and CWMP, Cooperative Watershed Management. I say that, I emphasize that, because the result there, and there's another colleague coming up, Jim will be coming up in a few minutes, talking about the work involved with all of those grants. There's a lot of legal requirements there. There's a lot of administrative requirements and a lot of communication with customers as a result of approximately 240 allocations to Water Smart grants, an amazing job requirement there. I think that's it for that slide. Can you go to the next one, please? I want to talk for just a second about, I touched on what the law says, but I want to talk for just a second about the eligibility and criteria that we use for each of the programs under BIL. So this is a link. You'll see the address at the top. This is a multi-page. We've just given you a portion of it here, but it's a brilliant chart, and you'll see that the line there under eligible is the one that says who can apply legally for this. I say that because one of the main questions we get from a number of different sources is, why can't I apply for once and apply for everything? Or why can't I apply for this or for that? And there are legal requirements. The other for each of them, and this touches on that. So please go to that address and take a minute to look at this fabulous. I did not do it, but this fabulous table. It's got a lot of information there. And also the criteria for each of these. So, for example, I'm going to talk for just a second about the criteria for aging infrastructure, not under Water Smart. It's a separate cross-jurisdictional. There's 3 different offices that work together on picking, on selecting projects under aging infrastructure. But they're looking at a couple of things, including the relative risk of not completing a project, the consideration of the impact as measured by size of investment, ability to complete it, acceleration of the completion timeline, what that means in terms of both risk, cost, and impact to humans. So there are criteria, and I was just describing the one for aging infrastructure, which is our biggest program under BIL, 3.2 billion. But there are criteria for each and every one of the programs under the BIL. Most of them were already in place long before, well, AI was developed, aging infrastructure was developed under BIL. The program had been initiated before that, but not implemented. And a couple of the other ones are brand new, but most of the criteria existed long before BIL. So we follow those criteria, and that's the why some things are used and other things are not. One other thing I wanted to touch on, this is important. The administration, the president, and as conveyed by OMB, has certain requirements. They're called, they're directives that OMB does, White House directives, and they are things that we try very hard. They are goals. We try very hard, and we consider them when we are selecting things, largely under Water Smart, but elsewhere as well, for disadvantaged or underserved populations, for what's called Justice 40, where we try to make sure that the number of projects that we select, 40% of them are, again, for disadvantaged communities. And we select them based on, there's an app that's fabulous. It's the Environmental Justice, it's CEJST, Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool that says where the disadvantaged folks are that we're trying very hard to accommodate, to get funding and get improvements to. So we work very hard to fulfill the administration's goals, requirements, and priorities. So I just wanted to touch on some of that stuff before we moved on to the next one. Next slide, please. Where is the BIL funding going? You're looking at the geographical dispersion here. The different colors represent different types of programs under BIL. And you'll see, if you were to marry this up to a hydrology map, that not surprisingly, where we put the money is where there's the biggest hydrological requirement. Where is it that we can work best to combat the current drought? Yes, we are using the BIL as it's with its stated goals of providing water and investments where they are most needed, but we are also doing it where the drought dictates that we do that. I'm going to pass this on to my colleague now, Dean Maroney, to speak further about WaterSmart. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Beth. And we can go to the next slide. So here on this slide, we just like to highlight some of the funding opportunities under WaterSmart that are open right now. And so I'll just talk for a minute about these. There's much more information on the Reclamation website, USPR.gov, WaterSmart. But if you look at these bullets, we've got 2 funding opportunities that actually closed today. Applications are due this afternoon for Title 16 water recycling and reuse projects and desalination construction projects. But those funding opportunities will be instantly open again with the next application deadline in September. This is something that we're trying to move toward more and more, is having multiple application deadlines so that somebody who's interested in submitting an application can see not only the current deadline, but what the deadline would be, several months later or next year. There are 2 others that close in January, small scale water efficiency projects, which are, as the name implies, smaller projects up to $100,000 in federal funding, and also aquatic ecosystem restoration projects, which are somewhat larger restoration projects. Later in the winter, water and energy efficiency grants funding opportunity closes. And then in March and in April, as you can see, there's a funding opportunity that's currently open for planning and design grants. As you can is probably clear from the name, under this funding opportunity, Reclamation's providing support for planning and design activities for potential new construction projects. And then finally, down at the bottom, the large-scale water recycling projects. We are currently reviewing applications that were received just in the last couple of weeks, but that funding opportunity is open again with the next round of applications due in March. The funding opportunities that show on this slide together, I think they'll be used to allocate over $250 million or so in BIL funding. And then, of course, others are coming as the winter and spring move on. I think that is it, and I can turn it back to Beth. I just wanted to say one last thing. If anybody is interested in more information about any of these programs, again, if you go to the WaterSmart website, you'll see links to set up time with the coordinator of each of these programs, where you can actually put 30 minutes on their calendar to have a call with them. Or if you prefer an good old-fashioned phone call, we can set that up too. Thanks. Back to you, Beth.
Thanks, Dean. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the benefit in economic terms of what we've been doing so far? It's quite extraordinary. In the first year, we had, I think it's about 6,000 new jobs that we created. In the second year is more than double that. The number you see there, 13,128, was just for FY23 alone. That's a huge number of jobs that we supported. And 1.39, that's again in 23. So the total for 2 years is 2.06 or $2.1 billion in GDP. That's astonishing. That's exactly what the goal was of the BIL, and we're very proud of that. I want to call out a couple of folks that have been working very hard on these data with the department. That's Ann Lewis Williams, Austin Ola, and Brandy Blumenthal, who have been working very hard to get these data correct, measure them correctly, and measure them using standard protocols of how to do that. Thank you. I'll turn this over to my colleague, Jim Kiefer, who is the very hardworking fellow in charge of grants.
Thank you, Beth. Appreciate it. Wanted to open up with something that we've partnered with the Environmental Protection Agency on from a DOI level. EPA put out a request for information back on the 15th, or put the notice out, and actually hit the Federal Register notification on November 20th, seeking information on, that will help improve the government's understanding of current domestic supply of products used in drinking water, wastewater, stormwater projects, agricultural treatment, and delivery systems. Not only EPA and DOI, but DOT, Department of Transportation, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Housing and Urban Development, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture are all going to be working together on looking at this data, analyzing this data to figure out some steps forward and how we can drive domestic production with this information. But not only that, it can help us gain a better understanding of where we have some holes and might need waivers, Buy America, Build America waivers that I'll be talking about more in a minute. But if you guys are really interested in providing some input, I encourage you to follow that link that's in the presentation. I'm hoping that someone can post that link in the chat as well, so you guys can take a look at it and provide some valuable input for that will help all of us. Next slide, please. This slide hasn't changed at all since the last presentation, so it's just a reminder of what Buy America, Build America waivers that we currently have in place. We have the small grants waiver, the de minimis waiver, the Pacific Islands waiver was one of the newer ones that we just got, and territories waiver. The DOI tribal consultation waiver is in place right now. And I do know that the department's working on planning for consultations coming up as well. And then we have two product-specific waivers in place for Santa Clarita Valley and City of Rialto for AMI capable water meters. We also have a number of things we're working on behind the scenes for some additional product level waivers and hoping that we can get those pushed through quickly with the department support and working through the Made in America office. Next slide, please. Beth and others have alluded to the tremendous amount of work that the Bureau has been doing, and this slide is indicative of that. Back before the infrastructure law and back before IRA in 21, you can see our volume was just a little over $400 million in grant awards. That's grant and cooperative agreements. And then it started jumping up, not quite doubled in 22. And then, we had a tremendous increase in 23 that shows, the growth of the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law and just getting into the Inflation Reduction Act funding that we're trying to get awarded as quickly as we can. So you can see the volume has increased, the dollars have increased, the complexity of these grants that we're awarding are increasing. For example, one of my offices is working on water efficiency and energy grants. Those typically are some of our bigger grants, and they take a little bit longer to get through just because of the complexity of it. But they're doing, everyone's doing a great job at the regional level, at all the regional offices that I oversee. So thank you. And Kiana, I think you're next up. And Kiona's from our HR office.
Good morning, everyone. So the staffing update, just at high level, due to all of the hard work that everyone in all of the regions has been doing, is we are currently at 272 new hires for infrastructure as of this month. Human capital remains to be the central of Reclamation's bill and IRA implementation. We actually currently have about 23 positions that are currently posted on USA Jobs as of yesterday for multiple vacancies with multiple locations. And some of our top positions that we are actually trying to fill the vacancies for are things such as environmental specialists, archaeologists, construction control, program management, engineering, and things like that. These are the positions that are actually in high demand for us. So that is a heavily focus for those. And that's just at a high level. So Beth, back over to you.
Okay, so what's this? Matt, can you take this next one? Because I was not aware it was mine. Oh, I'm sorry. This one, which we're segueing to IRA. So thank you. So that will be Bob Wolf speaking on behalf of the Inflation Reduction Act. Bob.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate the opportunity to give you an update on the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm Bob Wolf with Reclamation's Program and Budget Office. And the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, was passed more recently. It was in 2022 that we received funding for the Inflation Reduction Act, $4.6 billion. And unlike the bipartisan infrastructure law, which comes in 5 equal annual installments, it came as a lump sum of $4.6 billion in 4 categories that we'll walk through today during the presentation. And also, unlike the bipartisan infrastructure law, it has what the commissioner likes to call a shot clock. So the funds have to be obligated by a date certain. That means we have to enter into a legally binding agreement with a entity in order to obligate the funds. 2 of the categories are by the end of fiscal year 2026. 2 are by the end of fiscal year 2031. And we'll identify which is which as we walk through the categories. And then the BIL had a large number of ongoing projects with a few new programs. In the case of the Inflation Reduction Act, they're primarily new programs where they have to be established and stood up. So with that, let's go to the next slide. The first category is the section 50231 domestic water supply. We have a couple of different offices within Reclamation that are the leads on different pieces of how we're implementing the domestic water supply. And we'll walk through those pieces. I will say that the domestic water supply has a couple of unique features to it. Domestic water supply typically is part of a multi-purpose project that's been authorized for reclamation. In the case of this domestic water supply, it's specific to drinking water. It's $550 million. It's available through fiscal year 2031. So that's the date by which it needs to be obligated. And it allows up to 100% federal cost. So it does not have a cost share requirement. So that typically with the rest of the reclamation program for the rural water programs that were talked about under BIL, they have a statutory cost share requirement individual to each project that's been authorized, but typically it's in the 20 to 35% range. And so this provides a great opportunity for us to work with stakeholders who are, it's also for disadvantaged communities. And of course, tribes are all designated as disadvantaged communities. It is only available in the 17 Western states. So it's not tribes nationwide, but it also includes territories, of which there are 4 who qualify under reclamation law. And we did set aside $5.5 million in the spring to start a program with the territories. Next slide. One of the categories we're looking at is trying to do an all of government approach. So Jeff Morris from our Native American Affairs Office, he's in some other meetings today, but I think Natalie Washington and Kelly Tittenser are on today from his office. And we've been working with Indian Health Service, and they received $3.5 billion in bipartisan infrastructure law funding in 5 equaling installments of $700 million of 2022 through 2026. So we've been looking for opportunities to partner with IHS to be more efficient in how we deliver domestic water supply to disadvantaged communities. And then also we've worked with EPA, USDA, Army Corps of Engineers, and others to look for opportunities for how we can leverage funds across government. Next slide. So Dean Maroney, who you've already heard speak, his office put out 2 Water Smart funding opportunities. They have both closed recently, but as he talked about the rolling application process, the one that closed on October 17th is reopened, and it closes in the second round in April. So that funding opportunity is open. The 2 opportunities are really, one is for planning and design, which will be smaller dollars and more preliminary in nature, but also the drought response program. And within his office, I think Sherry Looper and Avra Morgan are helping on that one. And that's one where they were doing drought response kinds of things that will relate to domestic water supply. It's open to both tribes and non-tribes. And I know that they are reviewing applications as we speak. And they did get applications from both tribes and non-tribal entities under that program. And again, this is available through 2031 for obligation, but there is an interest, obviously, in trying to use money sooner rather than later to put it to work that is most valuable in the near term before inflation or other opportunities may not be available in the same way that they are today. And there's an interest in trying to put it to work. The next slide is the Tribal Domestic Water Supply Program. This one is currently under development. We have an announcement with respect to that will probably go out early next year, perhaps as early as January. Applications will be accepted through late spring and early summer. And the form that we'll take will be a Dear Tribal leader. And again, it'll be to tribes in the western 17 states that are part of the Reclamation program. And again, the grants are available for planning, design, and construction. So it's fairly unique that it covers all 3 phases of a reclamation project. Obviously, construction is one that we would like to get good applications for if projects are ready for construction. But if not, planning and design is also authorized and funds will be available for that purpose. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave Raff, who is going to cover the solar panels over canals portion of the program. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. Good morning, everyone. So Section 50232 within the Inflation Reduction Act included funding for canal improvement projects. Next slide. And specifically highlighted that solar generation is an increasing role throughout the United States, and that there is an opportunity to find efficiencies both in reduction of evaporation as water is transported in canals in the Western United States, and generate power through the placement of solar panels on those canals. Congress authorized $25 million within the Inflation Reduction Act for these projects. Next slide. So Reclamation has been implementing this new authority and appropriation on July 28th of this year. Reclamation initiated an internal call for proposals to each of our regions to identify or to collect and identify opportunities across the Western United States. Those projects were due to reclamation on October 30th, and we are currently in the process of evaluating what has been received and how to distribute and allocate that $25 million. We're actively doing that, and we anticipate that we'll be able to execute cooperative agreements with those entities that are awarded funding around or by September of 2024. We received 6 total projects through that process, and are very much looking forward to notifying those folks who will be receiving funding. With that, Bob, I believe it heads back to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. The next slide is just a map of the Colorado River Basin, which has been a focus of the next section, which is 50233. It provided $4 million for drought mitigation with a priority to the Colorado River, but also other basins experiencing comparable levels of long-term drought. The funds are available for obligation through 2026, and they can be used for grants, contracts, or financial assistance. And it says in accordance with reclamation laws, to or with public entities and Indian tribes. It is to be implemented in accordance with applicable environmental laws. And the initial focus has been on Colorado River for very good reason. And I'll turn it over to James Langhenry to walk us through the Colorado River portion of this provision. Thanks, James, for joining us.
Thanks, Bob. Good morning, everyone. My name is James Langhenry. I'm a policy advisor in the Commissioner's Office. Be walking through Section 50233, our Colorado River activities. As Bob mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act gives a high priority for that $4 billion to the Colorado River Basin. The basin is divided, as that map showed, into the upper and lower basins. And while both basins are currently engaging in system conservation efforts, the lower basin is on a faster track than the upper. So I'll quickly run through bucket 1, that's system conservation. When this program started, we saw both Lake Mead and Lake Powell at near 26% of capacity, closing in on some critically low elevations. So this program has been extremely successful in saving over 1 million acre feet in 2023. That has helped reduce releases from Lake Powell. And we're currently seeing some of the lowest demands within the lower basin that we've seen this century. Next slide, please. Maybe one more, patients. Thanks. Now I'll go to the long-term system conservation in the Colorado River, and this is where we're going to be spending the majority of those $4 billion on long-term sustainability for the Colorado River Basin. Currently, the lower basin request for proposals has closed, and we will be announcing those first projects in the beginning of the calendar year. Those announcements will be going on a rolling basis, and so if you don't see your project being accepted in that first round, there will be more bites at the apple in the future. We have seen an incredible demand in the lower basin with over 80 proposals, valuing well over that $4 billion within the lower basin alone. So we're seeing an incredible demand for this program. And I will also note that if your program is not selected or your project is not selected, that we are receiving great project proposals from our stakeholders, and that if we're not able to fund those projects through the Inflation Reduction Act, this section, we're going to look to identify those projects that we deem are helping the sustainability and see if we can find other avenues of funding. Now, in the upper basin has released a pre-solicitation letter seeking input from stakeholders. We've received that, and we're looking to announce that funding in the upper basin in early 2024. Now I'll turn it back over to Bob Wolf to go over the other basins. Patients, maybe go back a slide. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, James, and appreciate your presentation on the Colorado River. For the Commissioner has made clear in all of her public statements, and again, for obvious reasons, that the vast majority of the $4 billion will go to Colorado River, and within those for bucket 2. But there are, again, other basins that have had similar experiences with long-term drought. So we have been using an internal formulation process. We worked with the regional directors, who in turn sought input from stakeholders, and I know they sent out requests to water and power customers, to tribes, to non-government organizations or NGOs to get input both on types of projects and specific projects. And we received over 100 proposals that it, like the Colorado River, will far exceed the available funding. But we've got some very good projects that have been proposed. There are no official basins that have been designated at this point in time, but in public speaking engagements, I know the commissioners talked about California, really the Central Valley Project area, the Klamath Basin, the Rio Grande Basin, and then I know there are some sub-basins in some areas that have also had very severe drought in portions of Oregon, for example, in the central area. Some of those are all ones that will be given out to consideration. But we've asked for input and gotten input from a broad range of basins across the West. So we're working on reviewing the applicants that we received and hope to have more information, perhaps on a rolling basis, of selecting projects starting early next year. So let's go to section 50233, which is the drought. I'm sorry, 5080004, emergency drought relief for tribes. This particular one is $12.5 million. And the language associated with it talks about projects that have been, tribes that have been impacted by reclamation projects. So it would be a subset of tribes in the 17 Western states. The funds are available through 2026. And we expect there will be a funding opportunity announcement on grants.gov early in 2024. So it's being actively worked on, and I think there'll be announcements with respect to that in the near future. So again, this would fall within Jeff Morris's Native American Affairs Office, and Kelly Tittenser and Natalie Washington, who I think are on today. And they have done similar work on using regular annual appropriations, and when we had a drought supplemental appropriation, to work with tribes on trying to address drought and resiliency in the last several years. So we've had roughly $10 million plus or minus in the last few years. Again, the language of this one is slightly different. It talks about tribes that have been impacted by reclamation projects. And with that, I think turn it back over for closing comments.
Hello again. I think we can move to the next slide. I think we covered that one with Bob's comments and references to our Native American Affairs. Perfect, thanks. Okay, so final slide, just closing comments. As we said before, BIL and IRA come with, we know, very hefty expectations. Congress and the administration enacted these bills expecting generational improvements to Western water infrastructure and climate resiliency. So we don't get into all the details on these calls, but we know that that is happening because we're turning dirt and getting that funding to work on projects that would have taken decades for us to fund under our previous pace of appropriations. These outcomes hinge on the collaboration that we have with our tribal, our water, and our power community partners. And because BIL and IRA funded projects are developed, funded, constructed, and operated with the end user in mind, and success depends on project beneficiaries being part of that process. So thank you for your time today. And more importantly, thank you to all of you who have applied for BIL or IRA funding. And if you haven't yet, thanks in advance for being part of the Reclamation BIL and IRA program. With that, I'll hand it back to Mary Carlson for any Q&As.
Great, thank you, Matt. So at this time, we will address your questions. Please raise your hand using the hand icon at the top of the screen or submit your question in the chat or by emailing. You can also email in your questions for later answer, and that would be at usbr.bill@usbr.gov or usbr.ir.act@usbr.gov. Do we have any questions? Let's see. Again, please raise your hand if you have a question, and we will work to make sure you can be heard and seen. I don't see any hands. Does anyone have any questions?
You have one.
Barry,
Mary.
you have a
Looks like we
question.
have one. Okay, let's see. Tim Hoon. Tim, are you able to unmute and let's see. Tim, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Perfect. I have a quick question just about the aquatic ecosystem funding that it listed a date of January 24th, 2024. My question is that, it looks like the NOFO is not released yet, and maybe they're taking comments in preparation for a revised notice of funding?
No, it is actually on grants.gov right now. So it is.
Okay,
It is available. And if there's any trouble finding it or anything, let us know.
okay, great. I'll look on there.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Dean. Do we have any other questions? Okay, again, you are welcome to submit questions after the meeting if something comes up via email or at some of the contacts we've provided. Thank you again for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next quarterly update. Bye-bye.